I returned.
To whom do you leave your empire?
To the strongest.
Wonders are many, but none is more wonderful than man himself.
Well, tomorrow afternoon, BBC One's film matinee is Alistair MacLean's exciting Arctic adventure, Ice Station Zebra.
Ski Sunday returns tomorrow at 5:55 on BBC Two.
In 40 minutes, BBC Two's Festival of British Music continues with Vaughan Williams' one-act opera, Riders to the Sea. Now it's time for NewsView.
Good evening. The headlines tonight. Mrs. Thatcher is back from the European summit in Rhodes. After talks with the Irish Prime Minister, Charles Haughey, she said she'd been utterly dismayed over the Patrick Ryan affair. The hijackers of the Russian plane, which was flown to Israel yesterday, will soon be on their way back to the Soviet Union. And as many as 10,000 people are feared dead in the cyclone which struck Bangladesh earlier this week.
And the week's news. America's refusal to give Yasser Arafat a visa to speak at the United Nations brings international criticism. The European Court rules that Britain's anti-terrorism laws violate basic human rights. And a Japanese department store goes shopping in London for a £21 million picture.
Mrs. Thatcher has told the Irish Prime Minister that extradition arrangements aren't working properly and she's asked him to review them. At the end of the European summit in Rhodes, she and Mr. Haughey had an hour of frank talks about Britain's attempt to extradite Patrick Ryan to face terrorism charges. Mr. Haughey told her such cases were often prejudiced by publicity before they could be brought to court.
A Mediterranean squall drenched the Knights Palace just as the final session of the summit was due to start. But the storm did nothing to spoil the harmony of the official part of the meeting. Jacques Delors, the EEC Commission President, had decided in advance that it was not the time for another row with Mrs. Thatcher about European political union. Other leaders were equally keen to lower the temperature. Apart from a diplomatic tangle about how Europe should react when Yasser Arafat addresses the United Nations, much of the debate had an academic flavour. However, the ugly row between Britain and Belgium and Ireland continued to dominate the talk outside the council chamber. The coldness between Mrs. Thatcher and Charles Haughey, the Irish Prime Minister, was all too evident this morning. At the traditional team photograph, they found themselves standing next to each other. For once, Mrs. Thatcher seemed lost for words. After lunch, Mr. Haughey agreed to meet Mrs. Thatcher to discuss the Ryan affair, but no progress was made.
I made my views very clear to Mr. Haughey, and I think that he can understand why we hold them so very seriously and why we regard it as a very grave matter. We are on the receiving end of concerted terrorist attacks. It's our police, it's our soldiers, who, may I say, defend the whole of Europe as well, our civilians and our people, who are on the end of being bombed, maimed or killed.
Mr. Haughey himself was later asked about Mrs. Thatcher's criticism of him in the House of Commons.
Well, the Prime Minister is well aware of the reaction that there was in Ireland to that particular remark of hers in the House of Commons, and I feel that it's very unfortunate that extradition seems to have got into this sort of situation.
This was a relatively tranquil summit. mainly because all the difficult decisions about 1992 were avoided. But right to the end, the meeting was overshadowed by Mrs. Thatcher's feelings about the Ryan affair. And when she talked to John Simpson, our Foreign Affairs editor, it became clear that her anger was not primarily directed against the Irish.
Mr. Hockey is not particularly well, and I am the first to recognise that he's had this problem just dumped upon him by the precipitous decision of the Belgian cabinet.
So it's the Belgians you're more angry with than the Irish, is it?
Well, if the Belgians had taken what I consider to be the right decision, then I think there would not have been, a problem would not, of course, have arisen with the Republic of Ireland.
But is this really an effective way to get what you want? Because surely, actually what's happened is that you put the backs up of large numbers of people both in Ireland and in Belgium.
I think that you would be the first to be critical, and so would the media, if we just hung about for 3 or 4 or 5 days when we knew that there was something with whom we wanted to charge with a serious offence and did nothing about it. Then your criticism would have taken a very, very different turn.
What future is there for the Anglo-Irish agreement if it's not possible to get something which both governments accept is a reasonable sort of arrangement on extradition?
Well, we haven't got a reasonable arrangement on extradition at the moment. You're quite right. The Irish government changed it unilaterally. Nevertheless, our attorney tried to work it, and it is not working satisfactorily. And so I must ask, as it was promised when that new law came in, without consulting us,